Hey guys, how's it going? I really wanted to get on here because this weekend I watched some pretty profound biblical movies, and I'm always seeking the Lord even on the weekends. I don't typically like to watch any kind of movie, whatever. I always like to just um, always seek the Lord, and that doesn't mean I'm afraid to watch movies even if they're not Christian movies. It just means that I always want to hear from God. And so when it comes to watching movies, if my spirit is like, nope, I'm not going to click on it, I'm not going to do it, but um if it's a go, it's a go. So this past weekend, today is April 8th, 2024, and for a lot of people that know or don't know, today we are going to have a solar eclipse, and a lot of people are talking about it, how profound this is, and how America's the only one that's going to see it. A lot of people are talking about a lot of different things, and I do believe it is very significant, not just for the sake of what my eyes have seen on YouTube and people speaking about it, but just because I have been feeling shifts in the spirit for quite some time now. And the Lord woke me up early this morning at 4 a.m. and I just felt overwhelmed with strength and His presence. And I got up and I prayed. I just felt so much strength being added onto me. And I knew that there was a word today to share. And one of my prayers is that I can share words more frequently, but I don't like to just talk. I don't want to just babble. I don't care how long it takes. And that is something I'm working on with the Lord. But, I don't like to speak without a word from Him, unless He tells me to get on and then to just flow with Him. Other than that, I'm not fond of just getting on here to babble and to talk about assumptions, because right now the Lord is raising up a people of fire, people that are worshiping Him in truth and spirit, speaking truth and worshiping Him in spirit, not speaking from assumption, not speaking from guessing, not sugarcoating anymore. The time for sugarcoating is over. The time for sugarcoating was old news, and God is doing a new thing where people need solutions. We don't need sugarcoating anymore. We don't need sugarcoating anymore at all. People are dealing with real issues, real problems, and we need solutions. And our God is the God of solutions. He's not a God that ever sugarcoats anything. And the more that we get to know Him, we know that the way that He speaks to us, yes, God has a sense of humor. God is awesome, okay? But He does not sugarcoat, because this is not a game. This is not a game, So really the word and what I've just gotten today really has to do with the movies that I was led to watch this past weekend. And one of them was about the story of Moses. One of them was about the book of Daniel, and the other one was about the story of Samson. Now, the main story that I'm going to be talking about is the book of Exodus. And that movie that I watched was called Exodus, Gods and Kings. Now, in this movie, of course, every single detail was not panned out like it is in the Bible, but it gave me more than enough visuals to see the power of God, the plagues that He sent against Pharaoh and Egypt. And, when we're reading the Bible and we're sitting with God in our quiet time, yes, it's something that we can visualize when we see and we sit here and we read, because this is real. We have to remember that this is real, that our God is very much so real. And so, when it comes to our current times and we see the things happening and we see the signs and the wonders, it really should be a reminder that we have a role as children of God, as chosen people. Moses had a role. Daniel had a role. Samson had a role. They were all called for not just any reason, for nations, for generations, for God's people, to lead God's people, nations. So when the Lord commands us to do things, we have to think bigger than ourselves. We've got to think bigger than just me and my family. It's for nations and generations. It's powerful. Very, very powerful. No, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. It's not easy at all. But we don't do it in our own strength. We don't love, we don't lead, we don't teach, we don't guide, we don't pray in our own strength. We pray, we lead, we teach, we go, we do what God tells us to do because God is our strength. God is our power. God is our might. God is our endurance. God is our resilience. Now, the reason why I brought up the solar eclipse that's happening today is because I see a lot of people focused on the wrong thing as children of God, focused on the fact that something's happening. So people are now panicking, getting in fear, and allowing this to bother them, allowing this to make them tense. And I wanted to go back into the book of Exodus because the book of Exodus, the story of Moses and the Egyptians, is a manual. Okay, this is a manual to anything that happens upon this earth. Whatever it is, whatever happens, the Lord has given us a manual on how the children of God should respond, on how the children of God should react, on how the children of God should carry themselves. This isn't a fake it till you make it. This isn't a pretend. This is being vulnerable with God. Moses was vulnerable with God. Samson, vulnerable with God, even when you didn't understand. Vulnerability. Saying, God, I can't do this on my own. You know that if I do this, they are not going to listen, or this is going to happen, or this is going to happen. We shouldn't stop being vulnerable with God. We need God's direction. We need God's instruction. Because we are leading nations by His call, by His hand, by His word, not in our own strength. Now, God's people in the book of Exodus were never touched by the 10 plagues that came on the land. They were on the same land as the Egyptians, as slaves. They were on the same land as slaves. The Lord sent 10 plagues against Egypt. 10. Because Pharaoh wasn't listening. But God was the one that hardened his heart. God is the one that is always in control. Though his people were enslaved, God was still in control. Though there were 10 plagues that came across the land. Let's go ahead and read these plagues. Let's read these plagues. Okay? the plague of blood in the Nile, the plague of frogs, the plague of gnats, the plague of flies, the plague of livestock, the plague of boils, the plague of hail, the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness, and then the plague on the firstborns in Egypt. But guess who was never touched? God's people. God's people were never touched. They may have still been enslaved. They may have still been facing affliction, but God had a promise. He had a promise that he was going to deliver them. But he had to settle the matter. He had to settle the matter in the way that God knew that it had to be done. Why? Because if he were to just let his people go and Pharaoh never learned a lesson, guess what? His people would be free, but still would be slaves. And how many of us know that still till this day there are people who are free? We've been set free. Jesus died on the cross, defeated death, defeated the grave, took the keys from hell, rose up again to give us new life. We are free, but people are still living like slaves. Now that's another story for another day. But what I want to focus on right now, and what I want to make sure that we all understand as children of God, that even though whatsoever way this solar eclipse goes, whatsoever way any other event that the Lord decides to do on the land of his people, on whatever nation, on whatever country, whatever the Lord decides to do, his people will, for one, not be touched if they obey his commands, obey his word. Because they're his people, because he has a covenant with his people, we shall not be touched. 10 plagues came across the same land, and the only ones who were affected were the Egyptians. The Egyptians. Only.